Welcome to another episode on our channel. We are finally bringing to a close the World War II collection, but we're going to do this in stages. Here are the original players, and let's talk about them one last time. So, what we do know now that we didn't know then, perhaps, is that Germany and the Soviet Union had what was called the Molotov-Ribbentrop, or the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, which meant that they basically, for 10 years, they wouldn't fight against each other, they wouldn't fight for each other. That was the primary component to the pact. But also buried in the pact was this understanding that Europe would be divided between these two powers eventually. So they just weren't targeting Poland. It was going to involve all of Europe. But like any marriage, it takes two for the marriage to work. And with individuals like Hitler and Stalin competing for power and control, you know that's not going to end well. So what started out as a bad marriage ended up being an uglier divorce. So Germany invades Poland on the Western Front under the pretense of wanting to protect ethnic Germans. Poland was holding its own, but then the Soviet Union invaded Poland on the Eastern Front under the pretense of protecting Belarusian and Ukrainian ethnic minorities. Germany didn't declare war, they just invaded, as did the Soviet Union. So even though Poland held its own against Germany, when two forces were coming at them from two different directions, they eventually collapsed. And that's understandable. Despite having 1 million troops at the very beginning of the invasion, they could not sustain assaults on two different fronts. They never surrendered, but when they collapsed, the Polish resistance movement started to grow. And if we can believe the upper end of the estimate of 500,000 strong at the end of the war, that would mean that they were approaching about half of the 1 million troops that began at the beginning of the war. Regardless, this set into motion other countries coming into this conflict, and we will pause now and set up for those other countries. We are back, and here's our next set of characters in World War II. When Germany invaded Poland, France and the United Kingdom declared war on Germany. Germany eventually invades France, and instead of going through the Maginot Line, which was a system of trenches between Germany and France, they bypassed that and went through Belgium into northern France with their blitzkriegs. Once they breached Belgium, that broke a treaty, or that activated a treaty between the United Kingdom and Belgium. But with the blitzkriegs that took place into northern France, it was too much for the French fighters to sustain, and they collapsed. And then Germany became occupiers of France. The fighting still went on through French resistance fighters, but there was also still some fighting going on with those loyal to General Charles de Gaulle, fighting for free French forces. And there was unfortunately, some chaos taking place in another sector of France where the Vichy government had been put into place, and they were fighting. Those French military forces were fighting on behalf of the Axis powers. So you had French fighting on the Allied side, majority, and a faction fighting on the Axis side. So it was the worst of all worlds, I can only imagine. And in addition, of course, the French resistance fighters were in play. Estimates put them at between 300,000 and 500,000 at war's end. Italy, seeing the rapid conquering of territory and power and control being consolidated, and I shouldn't say really Italy, but Mussolini seeing this, seeing that France is about to fall, decides to enter in on the Axis side. And I do say Mussolini was responsible for that because in the end, Italy wasn't really, from what we can tell by events that occurred afterward, wasn't really fully committed to the war and the causes of the war. And eventually, there was some tragic loss of life of Italian military forces at the hands of German military forces. And eventually, Italy joins the Allied side. So that's just some interesting background. At the same time, some other interesting background is going on pre-World War II. There's a civil war taking place in China between Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek, Nationalist Party, as well as a Communist Party. And Chiang Kai-shek was winning. But while that chaos was going on, Japan was watching closely from the sidelines and saying this is a good time to make a territorial grab. And so they started fighting China. And China had to join forces to stave off Japan. So eventually China enters in on the Allied side. Japan, of course, enters in on the Axis side after World War II. So this is the next phase that brought in several other players in this conflict that drew in so many countries and cost so many, not just military lives, but civilian lives as well. We'll move on to the next stage, I guess. So here's our last wave of soldiers for the World War II collection. I wanted to do several soldiers from the United Kingdom because they were the glue that held everything together, United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, until other forces fell into place. United States entering the war after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the ugly, nasty divorce that happened between the Soviet Union and Germany, as well as the ugly divorce that happened between Italy and Germany, Vichy fighters joining the Allied side, and so forth. People getting on the same sheet of music to align against and check the original aggressor, primarily Hitler in this situation. Hitler and, of course, the change of heart of Stalin when he was betrayed by Hitler. But mind you, they both were kind of in it together initially. So very sad that these types of things happen with individuals making decisions for countries. It's kind of a shame that you can't elect somebody. What would be an interesting concept is if you elected somebody who is your leader, who does the fighting. So you have a leader between, leaders assigned to every country, and they do the fighting for the country. That would be interesting. I don't think we would have wars if such things happen, whereas there's some sort of fight to the death. Anyway, it's an interesting construct. I'm sure it will never take hold in our lifetime. But so we have the United Kingdom here represented, and so even though it says England here, this would be United Kingdom, would represent Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Here's a Chindit soldier that would have represented British and Indian forces that fought in Burma, now known as Myanmar. A Black Watch soldier, so a Scottish soldier, and a soldier, United Kingdom soldiers that fought in North Africa. On the American side, I have a 2nd Armored Division soldier who probably was infantry related to tanks. I have a tanker, 101st Airborne soldier, and a 9th Infantry soldier. And that makes it the collective between United Kingdom and the United States. Behind me, we have Germany, Poland, Soviet Union, the Polish resistance movement, France, Italy, the French resistance movement, China, Japan. So what we'll do now is we'll get close-ups, panning from this side all the way to the other side, and then here all the way to here. So we'll be right back after we set up for that. I'm not really trying to do this to be cute. I'm just hoping you can see the individuals in the back and the front at the same time, even though there might not be a clear focus. But here's one last look at our World War II collection. Obviously there are some 1/4 scale figures in the bag. Just ignore those. I hope you've liked what you've seen. If you have, consider giving us a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel. In the meantime, everyone, please have a great day.